Hi, fellow geochemists and geochemistry enthusiasts. Welcome to GeoChemISTea, the only podcast for people who love geochemistry with a side of tea. Our mission is to inspire future geochemists and to introduce our listeners to niche geochemistry topics. I'm your host, Sam Scher, and this month we're talking with Steve Tambanis to talk about reliable and repeatable field assays with pXRF and LIBS. Steve Tambanis is the managing director at STX Consulting and the director at RealTime Priority Limited. Steve, welcome to GeoChemISTea.
Thanks very much, Sam. It's pretty exciting to be here, and I'm a big fan of the work you've done over the last few years. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Steve, you've worked in operations as a resource analyst, business development, and all that before working extensively in various management and director roles before transitioning now to your own consultancy and directing RealTime. Could you walk us through your career a bit and ultimately what led you to co-found RealTime?
Yeah, look, like many people, I haven't had a straight career path. It's bounced around from working for major companies, for junior companies, a lot of different commodities. But in a nutshell, I'm an exploration geologist. That's what I love doing. That's what gets me out of bed. And we're always looking to see what we can have to augment our toolkit in the field. XRFs and then LIBS were pretty attractive as concepts for us. So three of us in Melbourne or Victoria, that's Mark Saxon, Mike Hudson and myself, we picked up a LIBS and an XRF to basically have a field laboratory capability in the back of your Toyota. That was the dream. The reality was a little bit tougher to get some of this equipment calibrated, but we wanted the ability to get some real-time assays, not wait 8 weeks for lab turnaround time, just so that we could make better decisions in the field at the time. Yeah, we thought it was all pretty simple. 2 spectrometers, all point and shoot, no sample prep required. We're in for a pretty rude shock. And it's been a pretty interesting year getting to know our equipment a little bit better and learning what we had to do to start getting better results out of both devices, the LIBS in particular, because it's new technology.
I love it. One thing I was just thinking was just so as an explorationist, and I understand that you were drawn into geochem via the core assay turnarounds, but is there anything else career-wise that you could say recommend to any of our young listeners out there?
Oh, look, I think the key thing is you've got to enjoy what you do. Yeah, if you enjoy field work and field exploration work, then do it. If you enjoy doing GIS work, then do that. If you've got a bent to be more in an office, it depends on what you really enjoy doing. I've covered, I think, pretty much all of the spectrum, and I just really get a kick out of standing out in the middle of a tenement or a paddock and just going, what's under my feet here? What can we find and how can we do it? So I think for younger geos, it's what drives you, what really motivates you and interests you here. We got into this portable spectrometer side of things as an aid or a tool to assist us in early stage exploration. Yeah.
Okay, I love that. So we're going to move on now to probably my favorite part of the podcast. So tea, I'm not sure if you know too much about that. It's a very highly cultured American term to describe gossip. So now I just want to welcome you to Tea Time. The kettle's hot, and I hope you brought us something good.
Thanks very much, Sam. One thing in all this work that we've been doing with our spectrometers is that we couldn't find any standards to calibrate our equipment and have the confidence that we were actually, especially for LIBS. I think XRF's a little bit more straightforward, but for us, because we couldn't. I initially reached out to some universities in Victoria. I couldn't find anybody that could make us pellets, and we wanted to have pellets made of materials that we already had assays for. We knew their characteristics and all the rest of that, but we just couldn't get a good correlation with that, at that time, very new LIBS device. We made our own standards. And the whole idea there was just to be able to have the flexibility to analyze whatever materials we were working on at the time. There was a big lithium focus for us with the LIBS, but we basically went and purchased a pellet press, a hydraulic press, and then very quickly learned that I had to do a hell of a lot more work in sample preparation. And that was an interesting exercise in itself. We bought a pulverizer and we just started to make pellets to assist us in what we were doing. It's been pretty successful. We've actually had, now that people are starting to find out a little bit about it, we've been selling pellets. We've actually exported pellets as well, which has been pretty interesting. And then we started to make pellets for XRF as well. And the reason that we did that is that with your traditional XRF cups, you lose the elemental sensitivity to lighter elements, your silica, aluminium, potassium. So with pressed pellets, without any binder, without a XRF film, we were just getting results on our XRF, which were basically approximating 3 assays, which I thought that was pretty amazing. Yeah, as a sort of a side business for us, and this was by no means intentional. We're making LIBS and XRF pellets to calibrate portable instruments.
That's so interesting, just the way that life turns a little bit like that. Like you had no intention in getting into a press pellet business,
Absolutely
but here
not.
you are.
So yeah, I did not think I'd ever be making pressed pellets at this age, but here we are.
How long did it take you to figure out how to get it right, if you will?
It took a few months. The first pellets were atrocities. There's no other way to put it. But I had set up an XRF lab about 20 years ago in a pretty remote part of Australia. So we did have a pellet press there, but there we were using binders. Yeah, and at university we did have an XRF. We did actually make pellets way back then as well. So making pellets binder free was tough, and that took a fair bit of finessing. But we're pretty chuffed with where we are at the moment. I think they're pretty damn good.
That's really cool. Good tea. All right, then. Look, Steve and I were introduced by a mutual friend to really just to get off our chests and chat about the trials and tribulations of working with field portable instrumentation. Steve's also a prolific blogger and writes extensively on LinkedIn about his experiences working with pXRF and LIBS. So for this episode, we were framing it around some of these articles, which you can find through his profile or on the GeoChemISTea website. A few of these you can find in our show notes as well, so definitely go and look for them. I think, though, before we get into our Q&A, it's important that everybody here have a bit of a background on your company RealTime. Everybody likes a good origin story, and I think it would really get us in the right frame of mind for our subsequent discussions on pXRF and LIBS.
Look, basically, and I'm no expert on this, but both these devices, XRF and LIBS, they're spectrometers at the back end, but they have a different technology at the front end to excite the sample that's being analysed. The XRF uses X-rays or X-ray fluorescence. The beam size is about 10 millimeters in diameter, and we'll come back to why that's important shortly. The LIBS uses a laser beam, and this beam heats a very small portion of the sample and ablates it probably 100 microns in diameter and 30 to 50 microns in depth. So it just samples the tiniest surface veneer of the rock or the sample in front of it, converts it into a plasma. This is at 10,000 degrees. And this plasma, when it cools, emits, that's what the spectrometer picks up on. Portable XRF technology has been around for a few decades. It's fairly mature, fairly reliable, and lots of competition. You've got multiple vendors. LIBS is new. It's especially for the geochemistry side of things. There's not too many people that are out there. It's really SciAps with a LIBS solution for geochemistry. Yeah, the advantage of LIBS is it can measure light elements. You can go from hydrogen all the way through to uranium, is what SciAps is claiming. With an XRF, you really can't sample any of the lighter elements than magnesium in the periodic table. Yeah, they're the key differences, the way I see it anyway.
And then, so what is it about that you guys are doing at RealTime that's really going to set the stage for what we're going to chat about here?
We're using these devices not to replace, we're not using them to replace laboratory assays. It's basically to get real-time analytical results and indications when you're starting work in an area or for ongoing work. You'll typically we typically go and do geochemical orientation surveys over the ground to see what we can and what we can't use. I think that portable XRFs are a fantastic vectoring tool, especially for the base metals, but also for ratios when it comes to things like lithium exploration, where you might use potassium rubidium ratios, and XRFs are just fantastic to go and do that. Gold exploration, you might be using arsenic as a vector, or other base metals or metal ratios. So yeah, this is why the portable spectrometry is of interest to us.
I love that introduction. And I think really that kind of helped with our introduction to the instruments as to why we would use them for particular types of geoscience programs. Is there anything that you want to expand upon for why in programs you might want to use pXRF or you might want to use LIBS?
Yeah, we use the LIBS basically as a lithium detector. I know you could probably use the LIBS for other applications. For us, we tend to use the XRF for any of the heavier elements. And our focus over the last 12 months has just been getting better lithium results out of our LIBS. But for soil geochemistry, yeah, LIBS is just pretty amazing. We've managed to write our own calibrations, and to the point that we can detect 510 ppm lithium in soils, which I think is bloody amazing. There's no other way to put it. To be able to generate lithium geochemistry grids in real time and every evening be able to sit down and look at gridded results, I think is pretty awesome. So that's where the LIBS is of real interest, and of course for analysing rock samples or chip samples, surface samples. In Australia, it's a little bit different. Our rocks are weathered to the point you can't even recognise pegmatites in places. You'll see quartz, you'll see some micas, and everything else is pretty much kaolinized or gone to the dogs. That's also where a LIBS is really useful. There's good and bad for each of the LIBS and XRF devices. I think you've just got to understand what your limitations are and just try and use everything to its fullest extent.
I think those are some really good points. So, one of the things that I was thinking about here, and I think it's super important to chat about, is that one of the major challenges in implementing these technologies, particularly with the light elements, is sensitivity. Could you explain the role of custom calibrations and how they enhance the accuracy of pXRF and LIBS?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. And calibration's crucial no matter what you're doing. You need calibrated scales in your supermarket. You need to tune a guitar or a musical instrument. And calibration is no different for equipment for laboratory assays. If you're submitting samples to a laboratory, let's say you're putting 100 gold samples into a lab, you're submitting 1 in 40 standards, blanks, repeats, or whatever regime you have. And the lab is also conducting its own internal standards. When it comes to XRFs, are fairly straightforward, but we still calibrate ours whenever we use it. But for LIBS, it's really quite crucial. And it comes down to matrix matching to your rocks. And I'm talking about chemical and physical matrix effects here. So you'll get interference from adjacent spectra that can impact your assay data. And I think the best way to utilizing or implementing any of these devices in the field is do an orientation survey. Go and get a handful of rocks, put them into a lab and use them as your standards, de facto or whatever. But they're your standards by which you can assess the performance of your LIBS and XRF by comparison. Then you've got something to play with. And with that sort of information, with that sort of orientation survey, you can make your LIBS return quantitative analysis, not just saying, yes, I've got lithium or no, I don't. A lot of LIBS users are very happy to have that yes or no solution, but what we're trying to do is to get within 10% of laboratory assays. Like I said before, we can comfortably detect lithium down to less than 10 ppm in soils. So if we take half a dozen soil samples and create together with get them lab assayed, throw in a couple of CRM standards, we can time and time again just get super accurate data in the field, which is, I said it before, that I'm still amazed that we can do something like that. And I think it's really interesting, and it points out how good these devices can be if you're prepared to do the work up front and do the sample preparation and the calibration work with laboratory assays to position yourself to go back in the field and then do really good, accurate work from then on in.
That's really well said. But something that I like to chat a little bit more about is sample prep. For this, I'm just wondering, are there any key differences in how you handle samples for pXRF versus LIBS, particularly in terms of using pressed pellets versus loose powders or rock samples?
Yeah, sure. And it's another really good question because we've worked on this quite a bit, not deliberately initially, but it's what we figured out. But it all comes back to this beam size. And your XRF has got a 10 millimeter diameter beam size. Your LIBS has got a 0.1 millimeter beam size, which is 100 times the width, but it's 10,000 times less area. So when you take a lib shot, you're shooting such a small sample. And I think all of this in operating a LIBS, it all comes down to if you can prepare a sample to play well with a 0.1 millimeter laser beam, then you're going to do okay. And what do you have to do to actually get a sample to that extent? And we milled samples, we sieved samples, we made pellets of different sized materials. And when we got down to about 150 microns in sizing, we started to get coherent results. And by coherent results, I mean that every time we take a lib shot, we'll take 6 shots, and each one of those shots is a raster pattern of 12 libs, individual lib shots themselves. We quickly had enough information to go and do standard deviation calculations and relative standard deviations. And any coarser than 150 microns, we were all over the shop generating random numbers almost to that sort of extent. And when we did buy our libs and we used it on our first job, I came back to my partners and said, guys, we just bought a very expensive random number generator. And that was because I was trying to use the machine to shoot pegmatites, for example. You'd either be shooting a piece of quartz or a feldspar, or a mica or whatever else is there, but you're taking 0.1 millimeter shots. So it wasn't a random number generator, it was the operator error more so than anything else. It just took us 3 or 4 months to figure that out. Coming back to, so that's the beam size comparison. Basic for lib sampling, you need to have pressed pellets if you're trying to analyze soils. You can't just shoot a loose soil because it's a really violent action. It's a very small, fine laser beam, but it'll blow up a cloud of dust like nobody's business if you try that and ask me how I know. So you have to actually have a competent sample for analysis. Otherwise, you're forever cleaning your device. You'll end up blowing dust particles onto your blast shield, and that interferes with the spectrometer. So there's all sorts of bad things that happen if you haven't got good sample preparation. For XRF, it's completely different. You can almost safely shoot a rock and get a good result. And by comparison, I'm happy just to take one single XRF shot, be it for your 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, or whatever time you set. It's really straightforward by comparison. The problem with sizing your samples is that you need a pellet press, and to lug a 50 kilo press around and to make pellets is pretty interesting in the field because it is a bit of an art form. And we make damn good pellets now, but it took us the best part of a year to be able to figure out how to do it consistently. But it's sample prep's pretty much everything, and it starts with pellets. We have developed another method. We've got a substrate method and slides. It's looking really good. I need a few more months to do some more testing, but I think we may have cracked a method of sampling in the field without pressed pellets for
Cool.
libs. Let's see where that goes. We might talk about that in six months' time. Let's see.
I like that. I like the update episode. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've also made different styles of pellets as well. For XRFs, you need to overcome the infinite thickness effect, so you'll need a thicker
Mhm.
sample. And yeah, and we typically do 32 millimeter pellets there because it's easy to aim the XRF over the pellet. For LIBS, you can get away with smaller pellets, but they're pressed much harder so that they don't come apart or dust up when you start the laser shots.
It's, to me, fascinating how things that I, in my, say, normal life would find incredibly boring, but these are the things that now really interest me. It's like
Yeah,
when you
well,
get in it, you're in it.
we did have to get in it. Yeah, we'd bought this. Yeah, this LIBS was the bane of my existence for 5 or 6 months. We'd spent a lot of money on it, and we just wanted to make it work. And we're pretty lucky. I got some fantastic assistance from Andrew Summers, and he's put me on the straight path many times on this journey.
Yeah, Andrew Summers, friend of the show, SciAps, based in Australia. He's Andrew's a vendor, and I think that this brings up a really good point that vendors of today tend to be very technical. And if you have questions about your pXRF, about your LIBS, about your TerraSpec, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, ask your vendor for help because they are smart and they know what's wrong. They have recommendations and leaning on them for these things because it is in their best interest also for your equipment to work so that they can sell more. So I say this having been a vendor myself for quite some time. And yeah, the vendors today are highly technical. So it's really great advice to just lean on them and help them help you make things work.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more with that. No, we have a Vanta, and the Evident people in Australia have just been fantastic to us. You catch up with them at trade shows or here and there, and uh, they've never hesitated when I've had questions, and I've had a lot of dumb questions. And again, they've set me straight in on many occasions when I've strayed a little bit, but they've been fantastic.
Yeah, I think that I have interchangeably asked all the different providers about what probably are seemingly basic questions, but they have also never treated me like I was asking something that was beneath them. So yeah, guys, talk to vendors. They know their stuff. Something that I found interesting in reading some of your material was where you talk about the issue of progressive degradation of these pellets using libs with the repeated measurements, presumably because as you continue to hit it, you continue to eat away at the sample. So I guess my question to you is how do you address this? What strategies do you use to ensure consistent and accurate results over time?
What we've found is that if you keep shooting over areas that you've ablated before, you tend to get slightly different results. Now, I don't know whether that's because you're leaving a small amount of residual slag in front of the laser beam for subsequent shots, but yeah, we've noticed different results. So basically, what I'm saying to people is that when you get a pellet, we have 20 millimeter diameter centers. You can put a hell of a lot of shots into a pellet, but once you've basically covered the full pellet, I think it's time to get another pellet. For XRF, that's very different. As long as that pellet stays intact, you could use it for 10 years without any issues. But for LIBS, because of that ablation, it does actually sacrifice or vaporize a small portion or a veneer of that sample.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think the last thing I just want to ask about pellets versus other media is do you think that overall, I think with libs, the answer is definitely yes. But do you think that there is any other advantages of using pressed pellets over soil cups over any other kind of material or for say for PXRF or what are your thoughts on this?
Look, let's start with the XRF. We've done a lot of comparative work. Again, this is more in just doing orientation surveys, but yeah, we'd take a bunch of samples and shoot the XRF through plastic bags. And then we went to really thin plastic bags just to see whether we could get better sensitivity. And when you shoot through a medium, and be it a plastic bag, a cloth bag, or even an XRF film, you do get signal attenuation for the lighter elements. It'll really influence your silica, your potassium, your calcium. You've just got to compare the results. And we noticed that when we just shoot soil samples on the ground directly with an XRF versus shooting samples through plastic bags. And yes, you've got to be a lot more careful with your XRF that you don't dust it up, but you'll get better results from direct sampling. So we extended that into making pressed pellets. And the good thing about pressed pellets is, A, you haven't got an attenuating film to shoot through like you do on an XRF cup, but you've also got a higher density sample as well. I think for reference samples, pressed pellets are really good. For general day-to-day shooting, I think do your orientation survey. You might be just fine shooting through thin plastic bags, but it depends on your target elements. And for base metals, that's fine. If you're after lighter element measurements, then it's not going to be fine, but it just depends on your application. You've got to tailor it.
So switching tracks a little here, I just want to talk a little bit about how you guys have been ensuring your data accuracy here. We've talked quite extensively now about homogeneous versus doing something more of a heterogeneous rock sample, but in terms of truly bringing these different instruments to the field, would you feel comfortable in, say, bringing your libs with you to a remote site and doing all of your analyses at the remote site using, just say, samples in that you've collected daily in the field? Or do you think that this is just not something that's best practice?
Look, I think if you turned up to a site with a LIBS, wanting to measure lithium, you will get a good qualitative result. You'll go, yes, I've got lithium. No, I don't. You can get some approximation on the tenor, but if you want accuracy, you're going to have to go and do some sample prep. You can't just shoot a rock and expect an accurate result. You need to have a homogeneous sample, and the only way really to do that is to crush it, grind it, and then press it, or put it on into our slide method to start getting consistent results. And by consistent results, for all of our shots, we're very statistically driven. We'll take a series of shots, we'll look at the standard deviations, and if they're all over the shop, you're going to get a horrible relative standard deviation. And that just means that you're not getting, you haven't got a very homogeneous sample there. That's a really good telltale as to the sort of accuracy you can expect. And look at the maths, look at the numbers, and that's a really good guide, I think.
And then I think that we chatted about this before, but just to underline what you've previously said about this, because it's a really important point when talking about anything geochemistry. How do you guys validate the reliability and accuracy of your data generated, whether it's from the pXRF or from the LIBS in your work? And what processes do you have in place to confirm that these results truly reflect the material's compositions?
If you've got lab assays, a handful of lab assays to use as a comparison, you're off to a really good start there. And again, it's the statistical data. It's just checking that you've got low standard deviations and relative standard deviations as well, just to validate that your numbers are good. And I'm talking about for LIBS use here. We're pretty happy with what we get for XRF samples. We can continually calibrate to pressed pellets or XRF cup or other standards as well. Unless you're actually actively doing QA, QC work as you're going along, you can start making some pretty big errors. It's really important to keep calibrating, keep checking what your numbers are to known standards.
To close out here, I have a few questions around some of your learnings and some potential barriers that we might still have. Reflecting on your experience with pXRF, what's been your biggest learning over the last few years?
Look, I think like anything, you've got to know your instrument, and you've got to know its limitations, where it works well, where it doesn't. But in particular, in the context of an exploration site that you're on, and it comes back to your orientation surveys at the first instance. That'll tell you so much about whether your XRF, for example, is going to be useful for you, or where and how it can be useful for you. I think if you just assume that because I used it on this site in New South Wales, it's going to be exactly the same on this site in Victoria or in WA, you're setting yourself up for trouble there. So it's know your instrument, do your orientation surveys, and then you can get some consistently good results.
And with all that, do you have an idea about potentially what might be the biggest barrier to using pXRF more effectively in exploration might be?
Look, I guess there's a few factors in there. Do you shoot samples out in the field? Do you collect samples and bring them back to your camp every afternoon or every evening for assay? It just depends on the conditions where you're working. And it's just, like I said before, know your instrument, know the limitations of it. And I guess one thing I should say too is an XRF is just another vectoring tool for your exploration method. You're still out there doing your mapping, field observations, and it's just a tool that's going to assist you. But having said that, if you use it effectively, they're diabolically good machines.
And same questions for LIBS. Most significant learning and barriers do you see for its broader application in exploration?
I'll say it again. You've got to know your device. In the case of the LIBS, you basically have to have a collection of sample preparation techniques and methods at your disposal. If you're doing soils, you'll need to press pellets or you'll need to slide mount your samples. An orientation survey is really important because the matrix effect is just so much more pronounced that's my observation anyway, that it's much more pronounced for LIBS than it is for XRF. I've done soil surveys in WA where I've used a calibration for one part of WA to another area a couple of 100 Ks away, and I got worse results than if I made a custom calibration. The matrix effect, again, it's know your machine and what you can do there. And for rock sampling, for pegmatite sampling, you've basically got to do sample prep if you want reasonably accurate results, but that's not going to stop you from at least getting indicative confirmation of lithium just by using an XRF on rock. You also, sorry for your LIBS, but you also have to have a clean sample. If you've got a little bit of dust on your sample, you're going to be analysing the dust. You're not going to be analysing the samples. There is a way of doing cleaner shots with the LIBS where you basically blast or ablate a little bit of the surface veneer away before you take your main sample shot.
Fascinating. And to finish, these technologies, are they saviors? Do they require additional innovation, or are they red herrings?
Oh, look, I think it's great to see that people are with these devices because it's just going to make them more effective in their use. And I really like that XRF companies, LIBS companies are continually refining and updating their devices, whether it's in the physical instrument or the software that drives them. I'm a big one on just seeing innovation. I'm a big one on talking to other users. And that's mainly why I started putting posts onto LinkedIn. I wanted to share some of my learnings, but also to draw out from the ether other people that have had possibly the same issues or worse issues. And it's been fascinating. People have just been in touch to say, oh, I've had this problem since day dot. And it's been really good to talk and share and learn and collectively do better, I think. So, and that's another reason why I'm a big fan of the work that you've done over the last few years. It's been so good to listen to other people's experiences and learnings, and it's just so useful.
Yeah, no, I agree. The amount that I've learned has been enormous by talking to every single one. I could probably say that the only people I haven't learned anything from were the isotope geochemists just because it was hard to get through and to sound halfway intelligent. That
Okay.
stuff is
Yep.
complicated.
Yep. When you say isotopes, you've already lost me. So it's
There's a whole field for them. Anyway, look, I just want to thank you for being here, and I hope that you enjoy being on the show. Thanks so much to everybody for listening to GeoChemISTea, and a big thanks to Steve Tambanis for coming on the show, dishing some tea, and talking about improving our usage of pXRF and LIBS in the field. Thanks to our sponsor, LKI Consulting, and to It's Water and Coma Media for our music, and I'm looking forward to chatting with everybody next month.